First, say my prayers are with all the families of those who lost their lives and others who've been impacted by this. I want to thank you all for being here in this room as well. Obviously, the questions we have are even more pertinent to the families that are here, and that's why it's important that we ask the questions and get answers. And if we're going to work to make sure that we can prevent something like this from happening again, we've got to get into the real details of what went on during those period of years, unfortunately years, where it seemed somewhere inside of General Motors there was a knowledge that this was a problem before it got to the level of recall. And I want to first take you, Ms. Barrett, to the tab you've got there, number 38. Tab 38 is the sign-off. This is it's called a General Motors commodity validation sign-off. This is the actual sheet that the engineer signed off on that approved the design change in the faulty ignition switch. You've seen that document before?
This is the first time I've seen this document that's labeled Delphi.
Now, what we're talking about here, I mean, how long have you been aware of the problem with these faulty ignition switches?
I was aware that there was a faulty ignition switch on January 31st.
Of this year?
Of this year.
Okay, so as you're going through, I'm sure some of the questions you have and are asking may be some of the ones we're having. First question you would want to ask is, what did we know about it? When did we know? Did we know well in advance, and why didn't we prevent it from happening? The first thing we all are talking about is, when was this found out within GM to the point where they actually made a change? I mean, y'all made a design change. The letter I've got here, this form, is dated April 25th of 2006. So 2006 is when your engineers, and there's a name on the sheet, there's an actual engineer who you just said under oath earlier is still employed with GM. There's an engineer that actually signed this document requesting, not requesting, approving a change in this ignition switch. In fact, with the part number's on here. Has anyone, in your knowledge, has anyone in GM taken this, he's an employee of yours, you can just pull him aside right now, and asked him, when you signed off on this in 2006, number one, why didn't you change the part number? And number two, why did you approve a change in the ignition switch and not bring it to the level of recall? In 2006, clearly people lost their lives after this was signed off on. So do you know right now, and you're under oath, do you know of anyone that has asked the person that signed this, that signed off on this, have any of y'all asked him those basic questions?
I know this is part of the Anton Valukas investigation, and I want to know the answers to the questions you're asking.
So do you know of anyone that's asked him that question? I mean, he's an employee of yours right now. You could pull him aside right when you leave here today and ask him these questions.
But I think it's very important, as we do an independent investigation, that we let Mr. Valukas go do a thorough investigation, talk to people, that there's not a lot of side investigations going on. He is the one standard that we're going to use in this investigation.
Clearly,
he brings the objectivity to it.
Clearly, I mean, you talk about a new culture. Has anyone been held accountable as of now for what's happened?
Again, we are just, we learned of this on January 31st.
Well, again, you have a design change in 2006 related to what we're talking about. This is not a 2014 issue. The recall was issued in 2014, but the product, the faulty ignition switch we're talking about, was redesigned in 2006 by one of your engineers who's still an employee of General Motors. If you can't get me that information, and if you do find that information out, by the way, would you get that to the committee?
It will be part of the investigation, and
we'll
All right.
Other question I want to ask you, because later on we're going to have the acting administrator of the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. Some of the things he says in his testimony, before you leave, I'd like to get at least some responses. He says, number one, we're pursuing an investigation of whether GM met its timeliness responsibilities to report and address this defect under federal law. Are you aware of whether or not GM has met its obligations of timeliness?
That'll be part of the investigation that we're doing to
So you're not aware at this time, though? I mean, if you're aware of something, that would be a violation of federal law. If you're aware of that already, can you share that with us?
I am aware of the findings that I've already shared from Mr. Valukas today.
Okay, and then another question he asked in the brief time I have left, he says, GM had critical information that would have helped identify this defect. That's the gentleman that's testifying right after you. You don't have the opportunity to come behind him and respond. He's going to be saying this. He's writing this in his testimony. What would you say in response to his statement that GM had critical information that would have helped identify this defect?
As I've already said, we have already learned through Mr. Valukas' investigation that there were points in time where one part of the organization had information that wasn't shared across to the other side of the organization. You can call it a silo. At some point, they didn't understand that the information would be valuable to another party. So I've already shared that we have found that to be true, and we've already made changes to the structure and to the responsibilities of people so that won't happen again.
All right, we appreciate getting the full range of answers to all these questions. And with that, I yield back the balance of my time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, now recognize